Brian Pannebecker, again, founder of Auto Workers for Trump, a Michigan auto worker himself, joins us now. Brian, good to talk to you, sir.
Hey, Vince, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
So how many times have you done this where you gone on stage and spoke up on behalf of President Trump?
Well,
I can count at least two, I think, right?
yeah, that was the third time. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, that was the third time. The first time I got an opportunity to be called up on stage. Donald Trump was doing a Get Out the Vote rally, and I had spoken to him prior to the rally. It was all about the auto industry. He's
yeah.
always very interested, very concerned. So when he got up and started doing his talk, he saw me in the crowd and he said, "There's the guy I was talking to backstage. Brian, why don't you come up and say a few words?" So I did. and then really crazy, the first rally he did after being shot was in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Yeah.
And he spotted me out in the crowd of 16,000 people. He spotted me sitting about 8 or 10 rows back from the stage. And he stopped his speech and he pointed at me. He said, "Are you the guy that I invited up on the stage when I was here in Michigan the last time?" I said, "Yeah." I was nodding my head. He goes, "Why don't you come on up here?" So he called me up a second time. And then this past week in Potterville near Lansing, he recognized me in his speech. I think it was in his teleprompter that I was in the attendance.
Yeah.
And he said, "Where's Brian sitting?" I raised my hand. He says, "You want to come up here and say a few words?" So he invited me up for a third time.
That's great.
So so that was the third time, and I'm glad he did, because when he invited me up in Grand Rapids, Vince, he had just been shot a few days prior,
Right.
and I was still in shock, and I was almost speechless.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unbelievable. I still can't believe that happened. I know that there's so few people who can. So when it comes to your organization, your group, you mentioned, I heard in the audio there, you started a Facebook group, Auto Workers for Trump. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your career as an auto worker, and what led you to do this, to support President Trump here?
Sure. I was born and raised just outside of Detroit in Macomb County. My dad worked in a machine shop. He was a tool and die guy. And we were Democrat. We were told, my dad and my mom and dad always said, "Yeah, we vote Democrat because they're for the little guy." Well, this is back in the 60s and 70s. So fast forward to when I was 19 years old, I had an uncle that was working at Chrysler Corporation. He came by the house one day and asked me if I would like to get in at Chrysler Corporation where he worked. I said, "Well, of course." I was taking classes at a junior college at the time. I said, "Sure, I'd love to." So I got hired in at Chrysler. I worked 11 years for Chrysler Corporation, a lot of ups and downs there. I was hired in the same month as a guy named Lee Iacocca.
Yeah.
And 11 years later, while he was still there, they offered buyouts, which was part of Iacocca's responsibility to downsize that company. And he did. And I got offered a buyout and I took it. And then a few years later, I had a relative who worked at Ford Motor Company, and they got me an application. I put it in and ended up getting hired at Ford Motor Company in Sterling Heights, right where I grew up, and hired in and worked 25 years for them. So I have a combined 36 years with two of the big three.
Yes.
And then as far as my political activity, I took a part-time job while I was working at Ford. I helped a state senator get elected, Jack Brandenburg from Macomb County, and he offered me a job as his district aide. So I took that, and I was able to work here in the district on his behalf while he was in Lansing. And during that time I was working for him back in the 2010 to 14 era, I met a gentleman named Scott Hagerstrom, who ended up being the director of the Michigan chapter of the anti-tax organization. I can't think of the name of it. The Koch brothers own it.
Okay.
Or run it. Anyhow.
It was Americans for Prosperity, probably?
Americans for Prosperity. You're exactly correct. So he was Michigan director of AFP. And as fate would have it, Donald Trump hired him to become his Michigan campaign director.
Got it.
Well, I knew Scott pretty good. So when Trump made an announcement that he was coming to Novi, I contacted Scott Hagerstrom and asked him if he could get me backstage to get my picture taken with Donald Trump.
Sure.
So he pulled a few strings, got me in there. I met Trump. And I got to tell you this part, Vince. I told him that we had the keys to the White House waiting for him in Macomb County because we were out in Novi at that time. And I said, if you come to Macomb County and ask for the Reagan Democrats' support and you get it, you might win Macomb County big enough to carry the entire state of Michigan. I said, Mr. Trump, if you carry Michigan, you win the White House. So he did exactly what I suggested he should do. He came to Macomb County. They reopened a venue, an outside venue that was closed in November, Freedom Hill in Sterling Heights. We helped them pack 15,000 people in there. A lot of them were auto workers, auto retirees. And 2 days after that rally, he won Macomb County, which Barack Obama had won both times he ran. Donald Trump not only flipped it, but he won it by 50,000 votes. And the margin of victory in Michigan was only 10,700. So the exact scenario I laid out to him played out, and he, the rest is history.
It is. Well, and I'm looking at, there's a survey out of the Detroit News, WDIV, yesterday, finding that President Trump holds the advantage right now in Michigan by over a point, 44.7 to 43.5, Trump versus Harris. So his chances in Michigan appear good again this year.
Yeah, and I'm working directly with Donald Trump's campaign here in Michigan, and his state director and that team are privy to some of their own polling.
Right.
And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. The margin's really bigger than 1 point something. It's more like 3 or 4 points. And I think the momentum is now back with Trump. I think Kamala Harris has peaked.
Yeah.
And the more the media stick microphones in her face and she opens her mouth, the faster her poll numbers will drop. I think Trump's going to win this thing going away.
So we're talking with Brian Pannebecker, the head of auto workers for Trump. He is working with the Trump campaign, as he just mentioned. Brian, you said, how many years have you been in the auto industry? You say 36 or so?
36 total
36.
Between two of the big three.
And so, and having done that, how have you seen Michigan change during that time? What has changed for you and your community?
Well, I'll tell you, Vince, when I first got hired in at 19 years old, my dad was a little leery of me taking a job directly for one of the auto companies because he had been around that industry for most of his life. And he said, the auto industry is very cyclical. It goes up, it goes down. He said, sometimes there are boom times, you're working a lot of overtime. And sometimes our lean times, you'll be laid off, out of work. So he said, salt away some money when times are good because you're going to need it. So I've seen ups and downs, but what I can tell you is this. I've seen General Motors and Chrysler file for bankruptcy. Ford barely averted bankruptcy because we had a fantastic CEO who downsized that company dramatically and got us refocused on our core product, which is Ford automobiles and trucks. So I know that the auto industry is, there's no guarantees. It could go away. And if we allow China to get their foot in the door over here with electric vehicles and our own government helps them do it, they'll go bankrupt again, probably all three of them. And we'll never have a domestic auto industry again.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. Well, let's talk about the left and its desire to force an EV mandate. Here's just not long ago, Kamala Harris on the issue of an EV mandate. Here she is.
So will everyone have to drive electric cars?
Well, by my plan, by 2045, we will have basically zero emission vehicles only, 100%. By 2045.
All right, let's go.
And let me add one more thing, Aaron. And also school buses. So part of my plan is that by 2030, we will have electric school buses.
Yeah, so she's saying everyone has to have an electric vehicle under her plan. And now today, according to Axios, Brian, I'm looking here, and they say that her campaign is being very squirrely about whether or not she wants to mandate electric vehicles anymore. What do you make of her positions on this subject?
Well, she spoke the truth. She said the quiet part out loud back in 2019 when she was running for the Democrat nomination. And she just told us recently her values have not changed. So what she's doing is trying to have it both ways. She's lying about her true position. They want to go all the way to have our military vehicles be electric only. It's insanity. Let me just say this. A prosecutor from San Francisco, the most liberal city in the United States, She was the most liberal senator in the U.S. Senate, knows nothing about private industry, knows nothing about the automobile industry. She's lost her mind, and Americans are crazy if they vote for that woman to be president and commander-in-chief. It's insanity, and we got to pull them back from the brink before they make a huge mistake.
And Brian, perhaps your answer about what's going on with the polling in Michigan kind of tells us the answer to this question, but what do other auto workers think of the electric vehicle mandate that the left has been pushing?
I'm glad you asked, Vince, because I'm doing an auto plant rally outside of a different auto plant every week. We started in mid-June. We're going to go all the way through to November. We set up outside the hourly parking lots where everybody comes in and out, and we're there for shift change when the day shift gets off, and then the afternoon shift workers start coming in. So we've got a chance to engage with those people as they pull up to the driveway to come out of the parking lot. A lot of them are rolling down their windows. We've got Auto Workers for Trump signs. We're wearing our Auto Workers for Trump t-shirts. Me and a bunch of other auto worker retirees. And yesterday we were at the Livonia transmission plant. We had UAW members coming out when they got off their shift. They parked and joined us. They're not even afraid of the union repercussions anymore. They're saying they've had enough. So I'm estimating it about 75% of the total number of UAW workers at Chrysler, Ford, and GM, and we've been doing rallies outside of every one of them. Next week will be our 12th. They're going to Trump. They finally woke up. These are the Reagan Democrats, the people who have traditionally been told to vote Democrat by their union leaders. They finally told their union leadership to pack sand. You guys have been shipping our jobs to Mexico for decades. We're voting for the guy who's going to save our jobs, Donald Trump.
I love that. And finally, not Trump related at all, but do you think it's appropriate that Ford made an SUV and slapped a Mustang logo on it and said it's a Mustang?
Not at all. Not at all. How embarrassing. I cringe every time I see one of those monstrosities rolling down the road.
I was wondering. I had to ask the expert.
It's
all right.
Disgusting. They hey, Lee Iacocca's probably rolling over in his grave.
Brian Pannebecker, the head of Auto Workers for Trump. Sir, great to talk to you today. Thank you very much.